Hey, I'm Grant with Grant's Game Rex. These are my top 10 two-player only games of 2024. It is hard to get people together to play board games. Life gets in the way all the time, so it's nice to have two-player games that you can play with a partner or a roommate or somebody like that. They're very popular these days, and that's not just me saying that. I probably get more requests for two-player game recommendations on my TikTok and Instagram than any other type of game. So that's why it was important to me to bring this list of the top 10 two-player games. There were a lot of great two-player games that came out this year, but these are the best of them. And, you know, some of these games do have solo modes, so maybe they are 1 to 2 players, and I'll try to mention that when I mention the game, but they are really designed to play 2 players. So if you're looking for two-player games, this is the right place. So let's get into the games. In number 10, I have Confusing Lands. This is a very small box pocket purse game from Envy Born Games, and this one does have a solo mode, plays 1 to 2 players. It is a fun little puzzly card game. You are drafting cards and then, building out a little grid of your cards. And you have to do the thing where you cover up some of a card that you have previously placed, which is always a hard decision because you're like, oh man, I wanted all these icons, I wanted all these symbols, and I gotta cover up something. It's a surprisingly thinky game that plays in like 10 to 15 minutes. There's some real interesting choices. One of the most interesting choices is that you can draft cards and play them for their scoring ability, but every scoring card you have starts with negative 10 points. Just taking a scoring card gets you negative 10 points. So you better make sure that scoring card is scoring you more than 10 points, or else otherwise it's a bad move. And so you're constantly thinking about how you can score what you're getting and how many of those you should take and stuff like that. And again, this is a game that fits into your pocket or your purse or that sort of stuff. So if you want just like a little card game, a puzzly tile-laying, it feels like tile-laying because of the way you're putting cards down, even though you're just playing cards. It's a fun little game. There is some, heavy iconography in the game, and so the first couple plays, you'll probably be in the rule book, just like, what does this icon mean? What does this symbology mean? But once you've played it a few times, you'll pick that up, and then it's not too hard. So, if you're looking for a little small box puzzly 2-player game, check out Confusing Lands. Number 9 for me is Jekyll and Hyde versus Scotland Yard. This is from 25th Century Games and Mandu Games. This is actually a sort of updated version of Jekyll versus Hyde that came out 2 or 3 years ago. This is a trick-taking game. The first version of the game was a head-to-head trick-taking game, and now this is a cooperative trick-taking game meant for 2 players where you are playing as one person is playing as Jekyll, one person is playing as Hyde, and you're playing against Scotland Yard. So instead of Jekyll versus Hyde, this is now a cooperative experience where you're trying to evade and elude Scotland Yard. The way it plays is there are sort of 10 different scenarios in the box, starting from easy and then getting to very difficult, and each of the scenarios along the way introduces some new rules, some new mechanisms, some new challenges, that sort of stuff. And you can play any of them individually, or you can play them as a campaign, sort of ramping it up throughout the experience. It feels more difficult than the original Jekyll versus Hyde. Like, there's some real challenges here because you are basically, in the original Jekyll and Hyde, you were trying to either win a bunch of tricks or win a sort of even amount of tricks based on who you were playing as. And in this one, you're trying to time out winning tricks. Like, you need to win exactly 5 tricks, before the end of this round sort of thing. And so it is definitely very thinky in how you are doing that, how you are sort of like, what do I need to lose? What do I need to win? That sort of stuff. But if you like trick-taking, there's not that many trick-taking games that work well for 2 players, and there's even fewer trick-taking cooperative games that work for 2 players. So if you want that sort of a thing, check out Jekyll and Hyde versus Scotland Yard. Number 8 on my list of top 10 two-player games is King of Tokyo Duel. This is probably my favorite game in the King of Tokyo series, partly because a lot of these, there's been a lot of these duel versions recently, you know, Splendor Duel and other things that I'm thinking of, where one of the things that the dual version does that I like better than the original version is it adds multiple paths to victory. So in King of Tokyo Duel, you can win by rolling dice and knocking out your opponent, knocking their health to 0. That's always been a way to win in King of Tokyo. But now there are these 2 tracks on a board in the center of the play area, and you are moving these markers on the tracks up or down. And if you can get one of them all the way to your victory zone, you win. Or if you can get both of them to your spotlight zone on your side, you can win. So this real tug of war, this real push and pull, I feel like it adds a little bit more decision-making space, a little bit more strategy to the game King of Tokyo. Yes, it is still sort of Yahtzee dice rolling. Yes, there is luck involved in rolling the dice. But now there's different ways you can go based on your character and your asymmetric ability and the cards that you're getting and stuff. You might shift strategies mid-game. You might double down on one thing. I like those choices and the way you can sort of shift your strategy in King of Tokyo. And it still has a lot of the same things you know and love with King of Tokyo, right? There is the big chunky dice you're rolling. There are the cool characters with great art, all these different characters you can play as. There is using lightning to buy upgrade cards, and those upgrade cards get you really cool special abilities throughout the game. All of that sort of stuff maintains from King of Tokyo. I just like the different paths to victory that exist in this dual version. Number 7 is Compile from Greater Than Games. If you like the game Air, Land, and Sea, this is almost like cyberpunk Air, Land, and Sea. You are going to be fighting for control of 3 different areas. I forget the actual term for them in the game, but there are 3 different things you are fighting for control of, and the first person to do that wins the game. And so this is another small box card game, plays in 20 minutes sort of thing. So I like that it's an easy, accessible game in that way. Another one you can sort of throw in a bag and take anywhere. It maintains the same thing that like Air, Land, and Sea does, where you can play a card face up, and that gets you a cool special ability and a power that's going towards that area. Or you can also play cards face down and then flip them up at different times and sort of reveal their power or reveal their strength and stuff like that. It's a really fun system of being able to play some cards face down, some cards face up. The difference here with a game, between this game and something like Air, Land, and Sea, is you are drafting faction decks at the start of the game. There are a ton of different faction decks, and all of those faction decks have different play styles, different strengths and weaknesses. So that's some of the real fun of the game, is how do you combo these different decks together? How do I make this deck work with this deck? That's some of the replayability too, of like figuring out different combos and stuff like that. And, it means that there's going to be probably a lot more content added to Compile over the years, because all you have to do is add new faction decks, and it changes up the gameplay a lot because there's different stuff to explore, different combos to explore, different special abilities to explore, all that sort of stuff. So if you like head-to-head card games, this is definitely very head-to-head. So check out Compile. Number 6 on my list is the game Kuiperium from Whitewater Castle and Dragon Egg Games. This game honestly came out of nowhere for me. I hadn't really heard much about it. I hadn't seen it at any conventions, but they reached out to me. I thought it sounded cool. I wanted to check it out, and I really liked the game a lot. You are playing as rival corporations mining this planet and sort of racing to the top of the track. Honestly, it's a race game at its core, but there's a lot of worker placement, a lot of tableau building along the way. But all all of it is in service of racing to the top of this track, and whoever gets to the top of this track first wins. And so what you are doing, you are playing cards down in front of you in your grid area, and you can only play cards on your side. And every card is going to get you a special ability when you play it, and it's also going to have different colors in the corners, and you're trying to create synergies with other cards. Oh, this one has a yellow corner up here, and then I'm going to put this yellow corner with that one, and now there's a synergy, and I can get a bonus later in the game for that sort of stuff. So you're playing cards for those special abilities. But all of the cards also come with worker placement spots on them. However, you can never put your own workers on your own worker placement spots. You are putting them on your opponent's worker placement spots, which makes for a really interesting strategy and decision, because I really want to play this card for a special ability, but it gets you a super good worker placement spot. So do I actually want to do that right now? Do I want to allow you to put a worker here and get some cool benefits and stuff? And so on your turn, you're either playing cards or you're playing worker placement stuff, or you're recalling your workers, and then you get the abilities, the actions, the benefits of every spot you pull back from. And so every turn is really quick. Every turn is playing a card, placing a worker, pulling the workers back. That's it. But there's just some really interesting sort of head-to-head strategy here with how you want to play your cards, how you want to upgrade your stuff versus the benefits you want to give your opponents. So if you like worker placement, if you like sort of tableau, building comboing cards together, if you like racing games, Kuiperium has all of that, and it kind of came out of nowhere for me, and it's a great game. Number 5 is Kelp, Shark versus Octopus. This is from Wonderbow Games. This is a 2-player asymmetric game, and it's asymmetric in all the ways that you think of that. It's not just player powers. Both of the characters have different win conditions. Both of them have different play styles. Both of them have different mechanisms. You're going to be doing very different stuff whether you are playing as the octopus or the shark. So the octopus is essentially doing some deck building. They're getting new cards into their hand, and they're using their deck to do some sort of hidden movement, almost shell game sort of stuff. You are represented by a tile that is on the board, and all of the tiles are up, so the shark player can't see what it is. And some of them are simply just shells, and one of them is an octopus, and some of them are traps where you can get the shark. And so you are sort of swapping, moving around, doing different stuff, trying to evade the shark. And as the octopus, you can either win by just staying alive until the shark gets exhausted, or you can win by eating 4 foods. You can get these food tiles out onto the board and go eat them, and that is one of the ways to win. Whereas if you are the shark, you are simply trying to find the octopus and eat the octopus. That is your win condition. But the shark isn't doing deck building. They are doing some bag building where they are adding dice to a bag, pulling dice every round and using the dice to swim around the board, to search different locations, to strike at a tile they can or can't see. You're doing a bunch of different stuff. But you can also use dice then to get some new cool special abilities, to upgrade yourself, to get yourself better special abilities and stuff. But every time you strike and you're wrong, a die goes into the sort of exhaustion track. And if you get too exhausted, you lose the game. And so it's just a really interesting, I love the tension of Kelp. Like, every turn feels very important. Every turn feels like angst-ridden because, you know, you only have so much time to find the octopus or to stay hidden. And so there are times as the octopus where the shark is right next to you and he decides to strike this tile instead of this tile. And you're like, oh, thank God, but I can't show anything with my face. I can't show any emotions. I gotta have a poker face right here. And I just feel like the game has a ton of tension like that throughout it, which I really like. This is also a very strategic game that plays in about an hour. You know, that's sort of the wheelhouse where I live. I love strategy games that still play in like an hour or less, and Kelp Shark vs. Octopus does that really well. Number 4 for me is the game Flatiron from Ludo Nova. Just to note, this one also does have a solo mode, so it is 1 to 2 players. Flatiron, I love worker placement games, and I love engine building games, and Flatiron combines the two in a really interesting way. This is another one of those games too that like strategy game plays in an hour or less, which is great. In Flatiron, you are moving your workers around the Flatiron building. Thematically, this is about building the Flatiron building, the famous New York City skyline building that's kind of like a big triangle. And so you are moving your workers around the building and stopping at various spots. And when you are in a spot, you can either buy a building associated, or buy a card, I should say, associated with that spot, and then you add the card to your little tableau area, or you can sort of fire off that location, and that location will be associated with one of 4 spots on your tableau board. And so, I'm on Broadway, I can either buy a Broadway card and add it to my Broadway engine, or I could just run my Broadway engine, and I've got 4 abilities to do boom, 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 because I've bought cards for Broadway before this. And so firing off an engine like that constantly throughout the game is just really satisfying, where you're like, every time I go to Broadway, I'm doing great. You know, I get money, I get columns, I get pillars. And then you are building levels to the Flatiron building. So there is a fun table presence element to the game as well. There is a sort of 3-dimensional aspect to the game where you're like building up these different, you're putting pillars down and then putting floors and then putting more pillars and then putting floors. And all of those will score you points in different ways, but it just looks cool on the table. And, it's a fairly easy to learn like engine building and worker placement game. It's probably a decent introduction to both of those things. You know, it's still a medium weight game, but I would say on the sort of lower end of medium weight. So yeah, if you like firing off engines, if you like worker placement stuff, Flatiron is definitely a great game. Number 3 on my list is the game Tether from How to Steam Broccoli. BGG says that this is a 2 to 4 player game. I maybe even the rulebook says that it's a 2 to 4 player game. It's not. It is a 2-player head-to-head card game. Don't listen to those other stuff. I'm telling you, this is a 2-player only game. And what a unique and interesting 2-player game it is. This is one of the most different, unique, original 2-player card games I've ever played. The game is it's just a deck of cards, and it is what they call a mirror deck, meaning every card, if it says 64 on top, then it says 46 down here in the other orientation. So every card, when it's laid down, is going to look different to your opponent than it is to you. And one person is trying to make connections horizontally, while the other player is trying to make connections vertically. And so it's like, it definitely takes a game to sort of wrap your head around it and see the stuff, because there is also like a market of cards over here, and you have to think, okay, that is both an 89 and a 98. So how can I use either one of those to my advantage? That is both a 71 and a 17. And so how can I put them out here? And then you can also, you're creating groups either horizontally or vertically with connected sequential numbers. You know, you can play a 33, a 34, a 35. And then you can sort of bring groups together and slam them together. If I can put a card here that connects that group to this group, boom, I can bring them all together. And when a group is either 6 cards or 10 cards or 14 cards, they're going to score points. And so if I'm the vertical player, I'm going to count how many vertical cards are in, how many like sort of spaces vertically this group goes, and then we're going to count how many spaces horizontally it goes, and that's how many points it's going to score. We just created a 10-card group, and it's 6 vertical and 4 horizontal, so I'm scoring 6, you're scoring 4. And it plays, in 30 minutes, but man, it is a thinky, interesting, 2-player card game. This is also a fairly small box game, one that you can bring sort of anywhere with you. And if you like puzzly games, if you like unique games, then I think Tether is definitely worth checking out. Number 2 on my list of the top 10 2-player games of 2024 is Ironwood from Mind Clash Games. This also has a solo mode, plays 1 to 2 players, and this game is another asymmetric 2-player game. You are either playing as the, I can't even remember what they're called. They're called the Wood Walkers and the Iron Clad Funnies. That's not what I can't remember what they're called. But there are 2 different factions, and you are doing different things as the factions. You are, in one faction, you are basically keeping to the forest, and you are trying to perform rituals and get these totems back to your outer dense forest in order to sort of, cast out this other group. And your opponent is playing as these people who are moving from mountain to mountain and like mining all the resources out of it. So it's kind of like this classic, the Secret of Nim sort of theme, where it's like the one group is like all nature-based and the other is trying to exploit nature and get the resources out of it. But the game really comes down to the interesting card play in the game. Every card, you have asymmetric decks of card and asymmetric win conditions and asymmetric play styles. Again, everything about this one is very different based on the 2 factions you're playing as. And you are playing cards to move, to add troops, to fight, to engage in combat, to get special abilities. It's all about like comboing your cards together and doing the right things at the right time. This is a very conflict-heavy game, and so know that going in. You will be constantly battling each other, and even the battle system is like really clean but interesting. You can either play a card for its special ability down in front of you, or you can commit it to battle. You are foregoing that special ability on the card if you commit it to battle. But then there are these top sort of strength and defense and influence sort of numbers at the top. And so you'll both commit 1 card to battle, then flip them over and compare the numbers at the top. I'm hitting you for this, you're hitting me for this, I'm defending this, you're defending this, and then who has more troops in battle is going to win the battle, and you're going to lose some troops, or you're going to force people to flee, you're going to force people to retreat and stuff like that. So the battle system is really clean and interesting. Just that hard choice of, do I want to keep this card for the special ability, or do I want to commit it to this battle and stuff? So it's a really, really cool 2-player only game. Plays in about an hour. I think it's really interesting. It's one I want to keep playing because there's enough cards that I feel like I haven't seen the whole decks in my, I've played this multiple times, but I still feel like I want to explore the decks and the powers and stuff and the cool things that the cards can do in the game. So Ironwood is really great. Check it out. And my number 1 2-player game of 2024 is Lord of the Rings Duel for Middle-earth from Repos Productions. This is essentially a Lord of the Rings re-implementation of the game Seven Wonders Duel. And Seven Wonders Duel is one of my favorite 2-player games of all time. I love Seven Wonders Duel. It's been a game I've played for a long time, and it will always remain in my collection. Lord of the Rings Duel for Middle-earth does a lot of the stuff that Seven Wonders Duel does, but does it maybe in a cooler way because of the theme. This is a theme that I like, but I have played this game with other people that have never seen the Lord of the Rings movies and still really love this game and maybe even like it better than Seven Wonders Duel. So you don't have to love the IP to love this, because there is some thematic elements that make the mechanisms almost a little bit more accessible in this version. For instance, in Seven Wonders Duel, there's a military track, and you are just sort of going back and forth in a tug of war on the military track. It's cool, it works, but there's not a lot of theme to it. Well, in in this Lord of the Rings duel, there is now a board with different lands, and you are moving troops from land to land and engaging in combat. So the war feels more thematic here. It feels more sort of tangible and accessible because there's a map and there's troops and there's combat and there's battle. There's also this fun slider. The production value of this game is great. There's a fun slider where Sam and Frodo are trying to get to Mount Doom, and then the Nazgul is trying to catch them, and so there's this race element going on there. There's multiple ways to win the game, just like in Seven Wonders Duel. There are 3 different ways to win the game. There's a really interesting card drafting system too. So, you know, the game is so much about what cards you're drafting, what you're comboing together, how you're getting special benefits. I love the multiple ways to win the game because it keeps the game different every time. I have won and lost via different paths all the time I've played this game. And so, yeah, it's a really, really good 2-player game. If you're looking for a 2-player game, I can't recommend it highly enough. It's another one of those very strategic games that plays in an hour or less. Usually less. If you're playing it in an hour, you're taking a while. But it's all of these games are really great. If you're looking for 2-player games, these are all ones I've had a lot of fun with here in 2024. So I hope you found something that you liked. I will be back with more of these top 10 category videos soon. Thanks so much for liking, subscribing, all that sort of stuff. I'm Grant with Grant's Game Rex.